Dear fellow redeemed, we consider especially our gospel reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4. We're going to start a little bit differently. It reads like this. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day, rage, rage against the dying of the light. The wise men at their end know dark is right. Because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Dylan Thomas goes on for 3 more stanzas just like that. 3 more stanzas written about 70 years ago, encapsulating the idea of all that humanity has to offer. When you stop and consider the words of Solomon, that Solomon says, well, what are your days? They are here for a time, they are missed, and then they disappear. And Dylan Thomas is like, no. You have to fight against the fading of the light. You have to rage against the dying of the light, meaning you have to wring out every drop of meaning that you can and struggle to preserve every minute of life that you have. And his words sounded remarkably similar to perhaps Job. Job, who had been through loss beyond what I could imagine. Job, who had been through loss that really turned his life upside down, and I'm surprised that he survived it. It's only by God's grace that he did. And Job, finally fed up with all of it, said, well, where is he? I've got some questions for God. Why would he allow this? Where is his care for me? If God is really a good God and a just God, what did I do to deserve this? It's one of my favorite places, and I would say even in all of literature. After the whole storm of the book of Job is crescendoing to this moment, and then God answers him out of a storm in Job chapter 38 and 39 and 40 with this barrage of questions. Who is this that clouds my thinking and clouds the world with uninformed words? Rage, rage against the dying of the light, Dylan Thomas says. Job says, I want an answer, and I want an answer now. And there are the disciples in this boat. And in contrast, it seems just like, a cute picture, a cool picture, a neat juxtaposition perhaps. It's a really cool Sunday school idea, and when it's storming outside and the wind is blowing and the sky is darker, it turns that ghastly green color, if you've ever seen that. When the sky starts to turn dark, it's one of those accounts that you open up and take a child on your lap and look again at what Mark 4 has to say. But is that it? That everybody else has an answer, and at the very least, everybody else has a question. Everybody else has an answer for how they ought to get meaning out of this life and how they ought to approach the fading of the light, as Dylan Thomas says. And his answer, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Everybody else has a question, like Job. Who am I that I would suffer like this? I didn't do anything, at least not anything worse than that guy, and by all accounts, I lived a better life than he did. So why me? And set next to it, it's like we've got Job, we've got God making promises to the Apostle Paul, and then we've got Jesus taking a nap, and the disciples wake him up, and it's a cool story because he says, peace be still, and the wind and the waves listen. But there's more to it than that. We can control, to some extent, the temperature and the weather inside of a building. We make sure that the roof doesn't leak and the siding is secure, and we perhaps get the air conditioner, get some maintenance done there, hopefully before everybody else does, so it's ready for another heat wave. We want to make sure that the lawn is watered. We want to make sure that the air conditioning in the car works also. At least if the windows don't, then the air conditioning should, right? Because we can't control the weather outside. We can't control the weather outside, and the world around us likes to think that we can. We can't control the weather outside, and all it is a simple basic reminder that God created the world for humans, and that He is the Lord over all. We can't control the weather outside, and it is a daily reminder that all I can do is adapt to the world around me, and it's almost like this subtle daily thing that the best I can do is walk out my door and hope for the best. I can begin the day as a Christian, I can begin the day with prayer, and I can put on a jacket or bring an umbrella, but who knows what's going to happen after that. And I can wear my seatbelt, and I can make sure that I floss or I don't smoke or that I use a grab bar in the washroom. Because statistically, those are good things. But we don't have actual control over huge things like tornadoes just spouting up out of nowhere. Heat domes, is that a new word, I guess? Heat waves that settle in, and we can't push them away. The weather is really this subtle reminder that we live in a world created by God, and He is the one with power over all of it. And we like to think otherwise. We like to think otherwise, and that's exactly why the disciples are so distraught in this boat. This boat, the way that Rembrandt painted it, we've got 14 people in there, the 12 disciples and Jesus, one of the disciples losing his lunch over the side, and Rembrandt himself giving a sideways glance to you, the viewer. The disciples in this boat, and the way that Jesus handles it. They don't know what's coming. Obviously, a few were fishermen, and a few knew how the weather in the Sea of Galilee could work. But when it spouts up, is there anything more shocking? Is there anything more shocking than all of a sudden this weather that you didn't see coming, and it's right there? Maybe you've had that experience. I know I have. For instance, one of the 2 times I've driven through a tornado, or at least a storm that spawned a tornado nearby, I was driving north on the highway, and the sun is starting to set, and I see this gigantic bank of black clouds over here, this gigantic bank of white clouds over here, and I'm like, I have to drive right through the middle there, and they're moving toward each other. Didn't have anywhere to stop. Didn't have any friends nearby. This was like pre-cell phone days, at least for me. And so I just kept driving. Maybe you've had that experience where you're driving and you didn't check the weather ahead of time, and then all of a sudden the rain isn't just raining, but it's coming down in sheets where the windshield wipers won't keep up, and you're starting to wonder, well, what does hydroplaning really feel like? It's not fun, I'll give you that. The weather is this simple reminder that we can't control it. A simple reminder that we can't control even the most basic elements of our lives of, I want to wear, shorts and a t-shirt today, or I want to wear a snowmobile suit today, but I have to adjust to what the weather says outside. And here are the disciples in the boat with the core question, the exact same question that Job answers, the exact same question that Dylan Thomas provides an answer for. Dylan Thomas, Rage Against the Dying of the Light, he says, you know what? God doesn't care. There's no such thing as God. Just do the best with what you've got. Job. Maybe God does care, but if He does, He's not just. And He's not fair. And God needs to answer to me. And the disciples. The boat's going like this, the disciples going like that, and Jesus is just snoozing in the back. Jesus is just sleeping. And their question, did you catch it? It's right there in verse 38. Jesus himself was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. They woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we are about to drown?" Like, Jesus, we've got extra buckets to start bailing because it's not too much longer before we are going to be like water level. Jesus, you've got to start helping here. Don't you care? It wasn't a question of, why are you sleeping? How can you sleep through this? How can you sleep through a storm? It's not a question of, why don't you do something to help us? But it's an accusation. You don't care. You don't care if we drown. Because if you did, you would be sitting here and helping. You don't care. Because if you did, you would be doing something different. And maybe that's the point of comparison. Here they are in this tiny little boat that's rocking back and forth that only fits about 12 people, maybe 14. They're in this tiny little boat rocking back and forth, and they can't change any of it. They can't say, all right, let's stay over at the shore, let's fire up the outboard, let's call in the Coast Guard, let's see if they can drop down a helicopter to save us. They are just stuck in the middle of this storm and stuck with their assertion that Jesus doesn't care. Exact same thing that Job says. If he cared, he wouldn't treat me like this. The exact same dismal conclusion that Dylan Thomas arrived at. If there is a God, he doesn't care. You are on your own. So rage against the dying of the light. Yikes. Not that you and I would necessarily come out and say it, at least not on Sunday morning at 9:40 a.m. But perhaps we wonder. Not the accusation, like you don't care about me, but Jesus, don't you care? Fill in the blank. Fill in the blank with anything that you particularly care about or pay attention to. Don't you care that I am dealing with this heat wave? Don't you care that there are people who are really living paycheck to paycheck or worse? Don't you care that everybody in politics is just sniping back and forth and just wringing their hands because it's just not looking good? Don't you care? Don't you care that my loved one is in need? Don't you care that my loved one needs your help? Don't you care that the doctors say they've done the most that they could? Not necessarily the accusation of you don't care, but don't you care about me? What is it about me? The world around us will provide all sorts of ideas and all sorts of ways for us to not face that question. The world around us will say, there's this marvelous technology called a smartphone. You have it in your pocket. You can look up all the symptoms and you can ask Dr. Google. You can have some experience of omnipresence by talking to somebody face to face on the other side of the world. See, you're in control. You have control. You have control over this little bit for right now. You have control because you can talk to somebody on the other side of the world and you can look at the map and you can look at the calendar, you can look at the schedule, and you have some control. But you and I know that the best that is a temporary relief. And at the very worst, feeds the illusion that we can't even control whether clouds cover the sun. Why do we think we can control even one heartbeat or one hair on our heads? And it circles back to that same question. Don't you care? Because when we come face to face with the idea that we can't be in control, that we aren't in control, that we can't control the simple things of life or the more complex problems that each of us may face at one time or another, when we come face to face with the truth that we can't control this, the only two options are to give up and throw up our hands or to start grabbing for all the control that we can find. Well, if only they listened to me, then things would be different. Start grabbing for all the control that we could find. Have they tried this? And I know what's going to happen next. And certainly, I didn't get in a car crash because I'm a better driver than that person, but I wore my seatbelt anyway. And we tell ourselves all these lies that, yes, in a worldly sense, it's good to, wear your seatbelt. But at the same time, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? And that grasping at control is little more than trying to be distracted from the real question. Does Jesus care? Does Jesus care if it rains today in Toledo, if it stays at 70 for another day or two, or if it goes back up to 100? Does Jesus care? Does Jesus care if your job is enough to cover the emergency that's coming up next week? Does Jesus care enough to keep your heart beating and to bring a return of health for your loved one? Does Jesus care? Does Jesus care enough that you can confidently raise children in a world gone mad? Well, look at what they do. They wake him up and they ask him, "Don't you care?" And how does he respond? Guys, of course I care. Come on, I was just having a nap. It's been a long day. No, look what he says. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." The wind stopped, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still lack faith?" He definitely has control over the wind and the waves. He definitely has control even more deeply over the trust in the hearts of these disciples. And when he gets up, he doesn't just say, "Knock it off, wind, sit down," but a stern rebuke, where Jesus speaks to that wind and he speaks to creation, the creation through him. All this was made anyway, you know that. Through him all things were made. He speaks to the wind and the waves and he rebukes them for acting so improperly while he's trying to have a nap and his disciples are terrified. But then he gets beyond that to the real nub of the question. Because the question isn't just the fickleness and frailty of human life. The question isn't that life is, we do our best with the statistics that we've got and make the best choices and avoid the really hazardous activities like smoking while skydiving. He gets past all of those questions to the real thing. Why are you so afraid? Why? Why are you so afraid? And he lets it sit out there. And he provides like the one answer, well, do you still lack faith? What is it that you are afraid of? What is it that you, on the flip side, would so desperately want more control over and the ability to move a couple levers and then your life would be easier and the medication would work and the pain would go away and it would have a life of ease and there would be no more worries? What is it that is sitting most on your mind and you said, if God just gave me a magic wand for 5 minutes, that's all it would take? And Jesus' answer, why are you so afraid? Do you still lack faith? Because the world around us proposes, yes, you can have some form of control. The world around us also proposes that if you have any sort of suffering that is wrong, that is bad, and you need to get rid of it, and if there is any sort of suffering, then that testifies, and here's the important part, that testifies to our conscience that we have fallen short, that we are frail, that our days really are numbered. And pain really breaks the illusion that we live forever, or that we would be justified in living forever. And that illusion of control, when it is out of our hands, the world's like, oh, let's get that back into the bag. Consider even some of the hot button topics. Anytime there's a heat wave, the memes start traveling around the internet of, maybe this is climate change and maybe it's not. And climate change is another discussion for another time. I think there's two things to know. First of all, that climate does change, because Ohio has been losing 1 day of winter every year since 1976. But at the same time, here's the more important thing, that the secular atheist scientists who want you to be terrified of climate change are working with a timeline that is billions of years long. And they say that things have never changed so much so quickly in so short a time. If you read 2 Peter, for example, if you read 2 Peter, you'll see that, that the world purposely forgets that God in his judgment sent rain at the time of the flood and changed things very quickly in a short period of time. And so the Christian is looking at, maybe some of the climate data, and you can quibble with that as you will, but the Christian looks at this and says, we're only dealing with like an 8,000-year time schedule, and maybe only 5 from now back to the flood. And if you're looking at 4,000 years ago, during the time of Abraham, was also the time of the Ice Age in Europe, well, things have been changing fairly steadily over that entire time. And so maybe this whole climate change thing, maybe it's not, there's something to it, but maybe it's nothing to worry about. At least to think about. We'll talk about that some other time. But it's the same question. Don't you care? The world says, here's what I'm seeing, here's all the data, and I want control back. We need to do this, we need to do this, we need to fill in the blank with all the solutions that just export our pollution somewhere else. The world says, here are the solutions for climate change, for instance. And all it is the exact same issue. Rage against the dying of the light. I don't deserve this, Job says. But I need to find some way to control it. Because I don't want to believe. I don't want to believe that my life on earth is as frail as it feels. It's an issue of the heart. And how does Jesus address it? Why are you so afraid? Do you still lack faith? And so just as the water is piling into the boat and it looks like it's going to destroy them, and it's reminiscent of the waters of the flood that God sent on the earth to destroy it, Jesus says, you know what? There's nothing to worry about. Why, dear Christian, today? Christians who are living through another heat wave this past week, and they say July is going to be warmer than normal. Okay, whatever that means. Christians today, Jesus says, why are you still afraid? Because the one who spoke to the wind and the waves, who rebuked them, is the same one who gave you resurrection in holy baptism. The same one who used very tangible water, water that they were bailing, is the same water that God used to bring you to faith and give you spiritual resurrection. And there is his promise. There he brought you into his boat to weather the storm. There he baptized you and gave you resurrection, so that you can say with confidence, you know what, I don't have anything to be afraid of. Sure, I'll think about it. There are some things that I pay attention to that are my responsibility, but there's no reason to be afraid, because Jesus has created a faith that is okay with him being in control. And when you walk out and you were planning on a sunny day and it starts sprinkling, and you can just shake your head and smile. Yeah, I don't control the weather, but my Lord does. When you're driving down the road and maybe it's another storm on your way to visit a friend or relative in the hospital, and it's just another reminder. I don't control even the little things in life, and nor do I control the big things in my life. But you know what? I have a Lord who does. And just as he was with them in the boat to say, peace be with you, so also he is with you, by virtue of the same water. When you were baptized, that he came to dwell with you in you individually and personally. So you can have with the confidence that this Jesus who controls the wind and the waves, who controls life and death itself, has declared Christian, have no fear. Peace be with you. Amen. We continue with the Apostles' Creed on page 8. Please rise. I believe in God,